Thanks for choosing to listen to this Late Night Linux Family podcast. We're only able to do this because of the people who support us. None of our shows are paywalled, but our Patreon supporters can get most episodes early and never hear any ads. Learn more at latenightlinux.com/support or support us by telling a friend or colleague about everything we do. 2.5 Admins, episode 298. I'm Joe.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Alan.
And here we are again. And before we get started, your customary Clara article plug, Alan, is extending ZFS performance without hardware upgrades.
Yeah, with the price of hardware at the moment, a lot of people are wondering how can we get more performance out of the storage systems we already have, since buying a newer, bigger one, even though the current one's getting old, is not really an option. And so we talk about some of the options to get more out of the systems you already have.
Which for once isn't so much the usual blanket recommendation, stick more RAM in it. It's cheap.
Yeah, this is no additional hardware, just what you can do with software to try to get more and, make the system last until hopefully prices normalize again.
Well, link in the show notes as usual. Microsoft tackles quality control issues. Just kidding, it's encouraging experienced workers to leave. A typically snarky headline from the Register.
Yeah, so a couple of weeks after Microsoft promised that they're going to make quality and reliability happen again in Windows, turns out instead they're going to try to encourage some of their most senior and experienced people to leave the company.
Yeah, so if you work for Microsoft and your age plus your years of employment working for them add up to 70 or more, then you can get a pretty sweet payoff and kind of early retirement, essentially. Something we would call voluntary redundancy. In the UK, I think it's called voluntary buyout scheme in the US. And this is just a terrible idea. This is just getting rid of all your, or some of your, most experienced employees at a time when they are the most needed, surely.
They're not, Joseph. Don't you know? AI will replace all of those people. We don't need humans anymore.
Oh, yeah. That's going to work out really well. It's been working out really well so far.
I wish I was kidding, but it seems unlikely that is not the major driver of this. Microsoft is very, very busily drowning in its own freaking Kool-Aid regarding this AI stuff. And seems about on par. With that said, layoffs at Microsoft aren't exactly a new thing. And honestly, neither is slipping reliability. I might argue that Windows hasn't really gotten more reliable than the most reliable version of it used to be since, I don't know, maybe Windows 2000?
So it might be that all these people that are retiring weren't very good at quality Windows either.
Maybe. And also they're going to be the most expensive employees you have, presumably, if they've been there that long and they're that senior.
The bottom line is definitely the reason that they're offering these packages.
Yeah, the bottom line is the bottom line, no doubt.
Yeah. Does it not follow logically that the people who've been there the longest have the most experience and are probably valuable employees that you should not be getting rid of?
That depends on whether you value your product more than you value this quarter's returns.
Right. And it can also be a less obvious way of getting rid of people who might be more resistant to using AI.
That's true.
The people who are well established in their career of writing code by hand, many of them are more resistant to just letting a computer do it all for you, an LLM do it all for you.
Yeah, or the managers thereof, whatever, yeah.
Yeah. We get rid of all the gray beards and then it'll all be fast and awesome, right?
Sure will. Sure will.
Well, related to this, your Windows Update experience just got updated.
The real headline here is that Microsoft's acknowledging that people hate Windows updates, and so they're allowing people to pause them for longer. You've historically not been able to pause Windows updates for very long, since since they got revamped in Windows 10. We started seeing, more and more aggressive mandatory update periods. To begin with, with the introduction of the new style Windows update process, you had to allow Microsoft to reboot your computer whenever it wanted to in a 12-hour window out of every day, which was just nuts.
So now they're changing it so that you can pause updates for 35 days at a time with no limits on how many times you can reset the pause end date. So essentially you can just stop it updating. That, to me, is not a good situation. I mean, yeah, give people the choice. Obviously, you can do that with Linux and FreeBSD, but if people are looking to do that, to not update, that reflects badly on you.
Devil's advocate. I actually think I'm going to defend Microsoft from you, because the more I think about it, the more I think they actually got this one right.
Oh, no, they got it right. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they should not have done this. I'm saying they shouldn't have needed to do this.
If they made the update experience less terrible, people would be less resistant to it.
Yeah, that water is long under the bridge. There's no point relitigating that. It's just, is this particular decision the right one? And I think it is, because at this point in time, even if Microsoft fixed every single issue with Windows Update overnight, it's probably going to take 5 years before most of their customers actually trust it the way that we all here trust, Linux and FreeBSD updates. The consumer demand for the ability to pause this is absolutely undeniable. I mean, you can't miss it. If you're anywhere in the industry, people wanting to not apply updates. So by giving end users this knob to say, A, I can pause for like 35 days, that feels like forever, and B, I can repause anytime I want to, what they're really doing it is making it more likely that the people who are trying to essentially permanently disable Windows updates will only do it for a month and then forget they've done it and quietly start getting updates again until the next time they get pissed off and give themselves. But that's just the right amount of time for people to forget they did it.
Yep.
Whereas without that knob to turn, what people used to do in the business world, you'd set up a Windows supplemental update server. Everybody on the domain now has to get updates through that. And updates don't go through it unless they've been manually approved by the sysadmin running it, which effectively means nobody ever gets any updates ever. And that's terrible. Or without a Windows supplemental update server, you might just black hole the DNS, for Windows Update to actually function, which is not hard to do. And that also is permanent. You can forget you've done it and it's still happening. But by doing it this way, I think Microsoft is actually cleverly using human psychology against the users in a helpful way by letting them do what they want to do in a less harmful way than they were already doing it.
Yeah. The other one I was glad to see was the always available option to shut down and restart without installing the update. I remember in the older versions of Windows, you had to know to hold shift while clicking the start menu or whatever in order to get that extra option to show up. But especially I'm working on my laptop and I want to shut down to go get on the airplane. I can't be in the, don't power off the laptop, we're installing updates for half an hour. It's like, I am boarding an airplane. That's not an option. I just want to shut down. I'll deal with it later. Leave me alone. I'm traveling. Not time to install Windows updates.
I had actually built a muscle memory, Alan, of when I was working on a client's computer and it was not a good time to get stuck with that. Rather than shut down, I'd do a short press on the power button because that does the quick shutdown. Whereas from the start menu, it's the apply updates and shut down. But if you just press the power button, then it would do a fast shutdown. The only problem is these days, almost every frickin' machine is set up for, a soft press to put the machine to sleep instead of doing a quick shutdown. So that's not as useful as it used to be.
Ubuntu 26.04 came out recently, and that contains ZFS 2.4.1. which means there's quite a lot of new features if you've just upgraded from 24.04.
Yeah, you're jumping from ZFS 2.2 to 2.4, which is similar to the Ubuntu release cycle, 2 years of changes in 2 major versions.
One of the biggest ones is fast dedupe, which you had a hand in, Alan.
Yeah, so my company Clara designed and implemented the fast dedupe feature for TrueNAS, or TrueNAS did the sponsoring for it. So yeah, that's one of the big features is that dedupe actually works now and can be high performance. And especially 2.4 includes a lot of the refinements to that and how fast it processes the log in the background and so on, and kind of smooths out the performance.
So what does that actually mean in terms of real life use?
So the biggest thing is that it's now possible to use dedupe and control how much memory it takes. You tell it, here's how much memory you can have, and it'll use that for dedupe and stop when it hits that limit.
So say I've got a bunch of files on my NAS, and then I accidentally dump the same files in a different location, a different directory. It won't take up twice the space anymore.
Well, it depends. If you turn on fast dedupe, then yes, it will use some memory and extra storage space on disk to be able to detect those duplicates. And yes, when you write the second copy, it'll be like, oh, I'll just refer to the first copy instead of storing the data a second time. Now,
this used to take up massive resources and we would never recommend it.
Now it only takes up moderate resources and we sometimes recommend it.
So in order to do this, ZFS basically needs to keep a giant table of every checksum and whether we've, when we last saw it and where it is on disk. So when you write the first copy of the file, we add it to the table and we have its checksum and say, okay, it's over here on disk. And then later when you write, accidentally or on purpose copy that same file onto the machine again, it says, hey, I've seen that checksum before. I'll just say there's now a second copy of it in this file, and it points to the same place on disk.
Yes, but we skipped a very important step there, Alan. We glossed over something major. It does not simply say, oh, I've seen this block before. Every time you ask to write a block, it first must calculate the hash and then compare it with everything that it's got in that giant hash table to find out if it matches. So the more data you've got in it, I mean, this can get pretty expensive. This is why dedupe historically was a non-starter. Dedupe has not magically turned into a thing that everybody should turn on because it's awesome in all situations. It is still expensive. It's just gotten enough less expensive that it actually does have a lot of real world use cases these days, which I really was never able to say the same about legacy dedupe.
So the problem with legacy dedupe is that table could be unlimited in size. Basically, as you wrote more blocks, a table would keep growing. If ZFS couldn't keep it in the cache in RAM to keep it hot, to make it fast, performance would go completely out the window. Basically, as you're writing a new block, it has to go and read the part of the table that has that hash in it and see if that block is already in the pool. And if that's not in RAM, then we're having to read it off disk. And if every time you try to write something to your hard drive, you first have to wait and read some blocks from the hard drive first, then the latency goes sky high and the performance goes right down to like 0. And it gets worse and worse as that table gets bigger and bigger. So with fast dedupe, the first thing we introduced was the dedupe quota that puts a limit on the size of that table. You can say, I only want to spend half my RAM or a quarter of my RAM on this table. And that way you control this performance and don't have a cliff where suddenly as soon as it gets one file bigger or one block bigger, performance just drops off a cliff because now sometimes we're having to read from the hard drive to check the table. And so that allows dedupe to accumulate all these different blocks and find the duplicates. When the table hits its maximum size, if you write new duplicates, those still work. It's just new unique files don't get added to the list and get treated as if dedupe was still off. And that's a big enough improvement by itself, but we also added the feature of dedupe prune, which one of the things we did to that table was add a column for the last time we actually saw this block. And so we can go through the table and find all the files that, have been on your NAS for 6 months and never deduplicated. And we remove those from the table to make room in the table for new writes. Because likely if you're going to store a duplicate of a file, in most cases, more likely it's going to happen very close together. Within a couple of days of you copying the file on, or you're going to copy the second copy of it. And so it allows you to kind of control what's in that dedupe table and take that limited amount of RAM you assign to it and make it as maximally useful as possible.
One of the ones I'm really excited about, which is kind of ironic because I don't really use RAID Z for hardly anything. There is some new code to make RAID Z VDEVs a little bit more resistant to getting hamstrung by a single slow disk in the VDEV. They call this sit out, which if enabled, what it does is it actually compares the latency histograms of all the drives inside a RAID Z VDEV. And if one drive is way off on the latency from its fellow drives, then basically that drive just kind of gets left out of some operations for a while. And this is a good thing because as particularly with wider RAID Z VDEVs, if you're out there trying to rock like, 10 wide, Z2s or whatever, your odds of having a single disk go only kind of bad, but that essentially, taking the entire VDEV out of the equation, that goes up and up. And if you've got a really big storage server with, say 20 10-wide Z2 VDEVs, that kind of thing might happen more often than you'd like it to.
Yeah, and basically by giving the drive like a 5-minute timeout, we see, can the drive catch back up? Was it just like overburdened and it was temporary and it'll be fine again? Then great. But if it keeps doing that, then we can be, all right, that drive needs to be replaced with a spare. But in the meantime, we're using the parity and recalculating the one missing block, and we're able to keep the performance of the pool up. Because otherwise, you can just be like, if that one drive takes 30 seconds to give up before ZFS gets an error and then decides to go to the parity anyway, why didn't we just only give it 100 milliseconds and then go to the parity?
And if you're wondering why we needed this, like give it 5 minutes and see if it gets better thing, if you're the right amount of experienced sysadmin, but not quite experienced enough, that might sound a little brain dead because you're thinking, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like all the drives should be seeing the same amount of activity in one, RAID Z array, VDEV, whatever. So why would a drive be that much worse than its sibling drives unless there's some kind of a failure with that actual unit? And the answer is, you got to remember, with ZFS and RAID Z, we have dynamic stripe size. So it is in fact possible for a workload to wind up hitting only a couple of drives out of a much wider RAID Z VDEV, a whole lot more than the rest of them. And that can throw this kind of latency skew. When you do a full stripe read on a VDEV that's also doing a ton of partial stripe reads that all wind up aligning on the same disk, then yeah, you can definitely wind up with a latency outlier that is not the fault of hardware and will in fact go away if you just let the drive sit that one out, let a few operations complete quicker, and then check it again, and yeah, let it back in if it's performing nicely, and if it's not, well, then kick it out.
Yeah, because it could also be, some smart stuff happening on the drive that just made it a bit slow, or it's an SSD and it was garbage collecting and it's going to be fine again in a minute.
God help you used an SMR drive and it's garbage collecting zones.
All kinds of things like that. So it basically ensures that we're not replacing drives spuriously, especially one of our test grounds for this was a giant US government supercomputer. And it's yeah, we already spend all day replacing dead hard drives. If you cause more false positives to that, you're going to kill us. But at the same time, our biggest problem is one drive dragging the whole pool down, because even when you have multiple VDEVs, because ZFS is kind of round robining across those, even if it's only every 10th write that is randomly slow, that's still staggering and stuttering the whole pool. And yeah, we've definitely seen this where even at Scale Engine, where somebody was complaining about the download speed of a video, and we look and it's oh, yeah, manually offline the one hard drive that's being a dork, and the speed's back to normal. It's why can't ZFS do that for us? Well, now it can.
It's actually a really interesting use case for RAID Z over mirrors that we didn't have before, because I have very frequently had to manually offline a drive that was technically functional but was too slow and was dragging down an entire pool with it. And that means that although obviously you have, you've got more fault tolerance in a mirror than you would in a 3-wide, RAID Z1, there's no way to have a slow, side of a mirror VDEV sit things out this way. This code really only applies to RAID Z because you need to be able to write to both sides of a mirror. You can't really just skip things. So this does make an interesting use case for, if consistent performance is an issue and you have a ton of drives, you've got yet another reason to potentially go RAID Z over mirrors. Although again, if performance is an issue, you do need to be careful when you're architecting it with RAID Z.
Yep. A couple other headline features. We now have what's called the special embedded log. If you have a special VDEV and don't have a slog, it will put the ZIL on the special VDEV. This solves a big problem where it turns out the slog never needed to be more than 16 gigabytes or so. And wasting a whole SSD on that is kind of wasteful, but partitioning it manually gets all kinds of scary. So instead, you mirror some of your NVMe drives together and make it your special device, and it's also your slog that way. Makes it much cleaner and lets you get maximum use out of that NVMe you spent a lot of money on. The ZFS rewrite command that can rebalance across VDEVs when you add more space and so on grew the -P flag, which basically kind of lies about the birth time of the data. So when you're rewriting the data in place, it's not actually changing. So you can tell ZFS, mark this as not actually changed, so we won't re-replicate it. It still gets rewritten locally and will make the snapshot bigger on the local machine, but it won't show up as a diff when you're replicating, so it won't expand the size of the snapshot on your backup. And then when the snapshot rolls out on the primary, you get the space back. But the downside to that is it will not, if you recompress it and make it smaller, it won't transfer that as a change to the backup, but it can really improve things for you. And then we added a new permission where you can allow replication of encrypted streams only. So instead of ZFS allows send to an unprivileged user, you can do ZFS allows send :encrypted, which will mean they can only replicate the encrypted copy and not ever get the plain text. So if you have a kind of an unprivileged user using for Sanoid or whatever, you make sure that in your pull-based backup, the bad guy can't, if they compromise that account, they can't ever get the plain text.
Let's do some free consulting then. But first, just a quick thank you to everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to 2.5admins.com/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And if you want to send in your questions for Jim and Alan or your feedback, you can email show@2.5admins.com. Scott writes, I work with many small businesses as a sysadmin at a local managed service provider. Lately, we're seeing a big trend of small businesses going with no on-premises servers at all, just cloud storage like OneDrive or G Drive. The problem is, no on-site servers means additional difficulty backing up those cloud drives. I used to recommend Synology NASes for this, since they have built-in tooling to interface with the big cloud suites, but obviously I'm not keen to keep recommending them. What do you recommend in place of the Synologies? I don't think simply mirroring the cloud storage to an unattended desktop on-site is a good solution. And while I could script something up myself using rclone or similar, I'd prefer not to babysit something homegrown.
So you kind of ruled out my first thought, as we've built for customers before, something like using rclone to download stuff from OneDrive or G Drive and put it on the NAS. Or the other way, to back up something from the NAS to, in this case, the customer had a big SharePoint install from Microsoft that included many terabytes of backup. And they're like, yes, let's get all of our document files pushed up from the NAS to the cloud to have a copy there. But yes, the biggest problem you can have there is the reliability and just trying to babysit it. In particular, it turns out with SharePoint, and I'm guessing because of that also OneDrive, if you upload an Office document, it will sometimes recompress that Office document differently, or save it in a newer Word format or something, where the checksum won't match anymore, and then rclone will flip out and keep re-uploading it. But Microsoft will keep recompressing it the same way, and you basically never succeed in uploading this file. And if you get immune to that error because it's kind of expected at that point, then you can end up missing when something really doesn't upload and cause you all kinds of heartburn.
Scott said that, obviously he's not keen to keep recommending Synology. We really probably ought to talk about some of the probable reasons why he might not still recommend Synology NASes. I got to think the very first thing is that I don't know if they've pulled back on this or not, but they were talking about only allowing you to use drives you purchased from Synology in Synology NASes recently. That one leaps to mind.
We talked about that on a previous episode months ago. And I know they waffled back and forth on it a couple times, and it was like, oh, well, you can use the Synology, but you don't get the drive health monitoring features if it's not a Synology certified drive. And I don't remember what the current state of that is.
It just felt like a rug pull though, didn't it? And it just put a lot of people off.
Yes, multiple times. And they've done the same thing when they pulled out some of the video transcoding stuff for people using it as a media center because they didn't want to pay for the patent license on that.
Yeah, they put that on the clients now instead of the server, which is, it kind of makes sense, but it's still a bit of a rug pull.
It's enshittification is what it is. I feel like rug pull, that's a little too harsh for this. And I don't mean that as in, I don't think we should be so mean to poor Synology. I mean that as in, well, you know how to boil a frog, right? You don't drop them into a pot of boiling water. You drop them into a pot of room temperature water and you slowly bring the heat up so that they won't jump out. That's enshittification. Whereas a rug pull is more like, we got you, we pulled the rug, we're done, we're gone. That's not really what they're doing here. They're just slowly making things a little bit crappier at a time and seeing what they can get away with.
Yeah, true.
Debunked science.
But back to Scott's thing. I hate to say it, but scripting something with rclone looks like your best bet to me. If you don't want to do that, the best alternative thing to try, and I stress this, try. This is not a recommendation that I think this is a great idea. I think this is maybe worth looking into if you don't want to do the rclone thing. There is a project up on GitHub called OneDriver, which is a native Linux file system for Microsoft's OneDrive. It is still pretty new. Its latest release is only 0.15. That was as of January 30th of this year, though, so it's at least not abandoned. So you can give that a shot.
But I think the two things that Scott doesn't want to do are your best options, aren't they? Either just a Windows box or rclone. Like, I don't really think there's a better solution for this, is there?
I think that a lot of Scott's unwillingness to just set up some random Windows box and do mirroring is that it's not a proper backup because OneDrive can reach out and delete crap off of that anytime it feels like it. If somebody deletes something from their own desktop, that will get mirrored onto your quote-unquote backup little Windows box. So you're still left with some way to need to back it up. Now, the way that I would accomplish this personally is it kind of is the unattended Windows desktop thing, but with a twist. I would be using an unattended Windows operating system running as a virtual machine under Sanoid and doing my usual snapshot rotation. And that would give me both the real-time mirroring and also the archive depth to be able to go back and recover from stuff that, got deleted. If the deletion had made its way down to my Windows VM before I could get to it, then I could just roll back an earlier snapshot, make sure that it couldn't reach the internet, grab whatever I needed, go from there.
Yeah, and I understand the business doesn't have an on-site server anymore. You might look at this as a service your managed service provider provides, where you have this VM host that Jim's talking about at the service provider somewhere, and you can just charge them monthly for storage to maintain a backup of their cloud thing. Because, both OneDrive and G Drive have lost people's stuff before. Or, we've talked about them just, we lost the credit card that you were using to pay for it and we deleted all your files because you weren't paying us. And there are lots of things that can happen that aren't just the cloud accidentally lost a couple of files, but there are lots of different ways that storage can go away. You want to have a backup that's not related to that same thing. And as Jim was saying, rclone works well, especially if you're pulling from the cloud rather than pushing, where I described some of the problems you can have there. But something that uses Microsoft's native client is technically more supported, right? And so having that Windows VM that pulls down OneDrive or the Google Drive thing, and then using snapshots on the VM host to make sure that, as Jim was saying, because it's syncing files, same thing goes with Dropbox. If somebody deletes a file from the OneDrive, it's going to delete it on all the machines, and you need to be able to have the snapshots to go back and not actually have your file be deleted.
There are a lot of horror stories on the internet right now. I actually had a client drop off a laptop to me today. Long story short, an organization that she works with as a subcontractor kind of snaked her. She attended a Teams meeting and they had a plugin that managed to trick her to click through an OK and wind up enrolling her personal laptop in that company's Intune to be directly managed. And so I got to undo some of that damage today. That was actually a lot of my day today. And part of that was disentangling OneDrive, because when it got on that company's Intune, it enabled her OneDrive, redirected all of her documents and pictures and video and everything, and desktop, everything else to it. And she hated it, wanted to go back to just the local folders for it. And if you've never had to do that, get ready to break out the registry editor, because none of the tooling that's supposed to do it with just clicking buttons actually works. And while I was researching this, I'm going through to find how other people have solved this issue before I just, open the registry editor and Leroy Jenkins my way in. And what I saw was just endless threads on Reddit and on, Microsoft's own support forums with people who, wound up with OneDrive being enabled very nearly by default when they set up a new Windows 11 machine, being upset about that, and then going and trying to fix it, deleting things off of the cloud side of OneDrive and seeing that, oh crap, that all disappeared from my actual desktop too. What the hell? People get really crossed up with this stuff.
Yeah, and sometimes the only differentiation is a little green check mark in the bottom of the file icon, and you don't see that depending on the view. And we talked about this happening kind of the other way around on a previous episode, where somebody got tricked by the Samsung software on their phone to enrolling in OneDrive on their phone, and it copied all the pictures from their phone down to their computer, filling the hard drive, and then it wasn't possible to log into the computer because the hard drive was full and it couldn't log the login attempt.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. Remember, show@2.5admins.com if you want to send in your questions or your feedback. You can find me at joelrest.com/mastodon.
You can find me at mercenarysysadmin.com.
And I finally set up my website, alanjude.com, with links to all my socials.
No way. Well, we'll see you next week.